The sudden gust of wind blew dust across the empty station platform, swirling around Winifred Mason's ankles as she clutched her travel bag tightly against her chest. The year was 1875, and Sweetwater Junction was nothing more than a weathered wooden platform with a small ticket office that appeared to be abandoned. She had arrived in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming Territory, with no one to meet her. The train whistle had sounded its farewell 10 minutes ago, leaving her alone with nothing but the endless prairie stretching in every direction. Winifred had specifically written in her last letter that she would arrive on the 4 o'clock train on Thursday. But the station master in Cheyenne had informed her at the last minute that they were running the 3 o'clock early today instead, and the next train wouldn't come through for 3 days. She'd had no choice but to board early, praying her brother would somehow know to meet her ahead of schedule. The sun beat down relentlessly as she squinted at the horizon, hoping to see a wagon approaching. There was nothing but the distant shimmer of heat rising from the plains. "Madam, seems your train came early, and no one was there to meet you." Winifred spun around at the sound of the deep voice behind her. Standing there was a tall man with dust-covered boots and a worn Stetson pulled low over his eyes. His face was tanned and weathered, but his eyes were a startling blue beneath the shadow of his hat. He wasn't smiling, but there was something kind in his expression. "I suppose so," she replied cautiously, gripping her bag tighter. He stepped forward and removed his hat, revealing sandy blonde hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Name's Ethan Thornton. I own a ranch about 5 miles west of here. I reckon I was meant to be passing through today." His lips curved into a gentle smile. "Might I ask who you were expectin'?" "My brother, Samuel Mason. He has a homestead near here, or so his letters say." Recognition flickered across Ethan's face. "Mason's place? That's about 12 miles north." "Good man, your brother." He glanced at the sky. "Sun'll be setting in a few hours. No one else will be coming by here today." Winifred felt a flutter of panic. She'd come all the way from Boston to this desolate place, and now she was stranded. "I can take you to your brother's place," Ethan offered, replacing his hat. "My wagon's just over there." He pointed to a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. Winifred hesitated. In Boston, one didn't simply accept rides from strange men, but this wasn't Boston, and she had little choice. "I would be most grateful, Mr. Thornton." "Just Ethan, madam, and you are Winifred Mason. Winnie to my friends." Ethan nodded and reached for her bag. "Well, Miss Mason, let's get you home." As he helped her into the wagon, his hand briefly touching hers, Winifred felt an unexpected warmth spread through her. Perhaps her brother's absence wasn't such a misfortune after all. "I guess I was meant to be here today," Ethan said quietly as he climbed up beside her. Sometimes fate has its own plans. The wagon lurched forward, taking Winifred toward her new life, one that had already begun to unfold in ways she couldn't have imagined. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Ethan's wagon rolled across the prairie. Winifred sat stiffly on the wooden seat, maintaining a proper distance from the cowboy beside her. The vast openness of Wyoming Territory stretched endlessly around them, so different from the crowded streets of Boston. "Have you come far, Miss Mason?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. "From Boston. A week on trains that grew progressively smaller and less comfortable." She adjusted her bonnet, which offered little protection against the persistent wind. "I've never seen so much. Nothing." Ethan chuckled. "This nothing is the most beautiful place on God's green earth, once you learn to see it." "I'll have to take your word for it," she replied, but found herself studying the landscape more carefully, the rolling hills covered with golden grass, distant mountains painted purple against the sky, wildflowers dotting the prairie like splashes of an artist's palette. "What brings you all the way from Boston to Sweetwater Junction?" Ethan asked. Winifred hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger. "My parents passed away last winter, influenza. There was nothing left for me there." "I'm sorry for your loss," he said softly. "Thank you. Samuel is my only family now. He wrote that he's built a proper house and the land is promising. He suggested I might come teach at the settlement school. We could use a school teacher around these parts." Ethan nodded. "Most folks here can barely write their names." The wagon hit a rut, jolting Winifred against Ethan's side. She quickly straightened, a flush warming her cheeks. "Sorry about that," Ethan said, though he didn't sound particularly apologetic. "Trail gets rough here." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic creaking of the wagon wheels and the horse's steady gait the only sounds besides the occasional whisper of wind through the grass. "Your brother's done well for himself," Ethan said eventually. "Started with nothing 3 years ago. Now he's got 40 acres fenced, a small herd and that house he mentioned. He's a hard worker. You know him well enough. Neighbors tend to know each other out here even when they're miles apart. We help each other when needed." The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. Winifred had never seen such colors in a sky before. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Ethan glanced at her, then back at the sunset. "That it is. One of the reasons I could never leave this place." "Have you lived here long?" "Born in Missouri. Came out here after the war with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back. Worked cattle drives until I saved enough to stake my claim. That was 7 years ago." His voice held pride. "Built everything myself. It's not much compared to what you're used to in Boston, but it's mine." Winifred noticed the way his shoulders straightened when he spoke of his ranch. "That's admirable, Mr. Thornton." "Ethan," he corrected gently. "Ethan," she repeated, the name feeling oddly intimate on her lips. A hawk circled overhead, its cry piercing the evening air. Winifred watched it soar, marveling at its freedom. "Red-tailed hawk," Ethan said, following her gaze. "Good hunting tonight." The wagon crested a small rise and Ethan pointed ahead. "That's your brother's place." In the distance, Winifred could make out a simple homestead, a modest wooden house with a porch, a barn, and several outbuildings, all nestled in a small valley beside a creek lined with cottonwood trees. Smoke rose from the chimney, a welcoming sight as dusk approached. "It looks cozy," she said, trying to sound enthusiastic despite the stark simplicity of the place that would be her new home. Ethan glanced at her, a knowing look in his eyes. "It's not what you're used to." "I didn't come expecting Boston comforts," she replied with more confidence than she felt. "I came for a new beginning." "Those are plentiful out here," he said. Then, more gently, "Your brother's a good man. He'll make sure you're comfortable." As they approached the homestead, a figure emerged from the barn, a tall man who shaded his eyes against the setting sun. When he recognized the wagon, he broke into a run. "That's Samuel," Winifred said, her heart lifting at the sight of her brother. The wagon hadn't fully stopped before Samuel reached them, his face a mixture of relief and confusion. "Winnie, what are you doing here today?" "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." Winifred allowed her brother to help her down from the wagon. "The train came early, and no one was there to meet me. Mr. Thornton was kind enough to bring me home." Samuel turned to Ethan with gratitude. "I can't thank you enough, Thornton. I'd have been sick with worry if she'd been stranded at the station overnight." Ethan tipped his hat. "Just happened to be in the right place at the right time." "You must stay for supper," Samuel insisted. "It's the least I can do." Ethan glanced at Winifred, who found herself hoping he would accept. "That's mighty kind of you," Ethan said. "I'd be obliged to accept." As Samuel led them toward the house, Winifred cast one last look at the vast prairie behind them, now bathed in the golden light of sunset. Perhaps, she thought, there was beauty in this nothing after all. The interior of Samuel's home was simple but surprisingly comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a sturdy table, several chairs, and a small sofa covered in faded fabric. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and kerosene lamps cast a warm glow over the wooden floors and walls adorned with simple curtains. "It's not much," Samuel said apologetically as he showed Winifred around, "but the bedroom at the back is yours. I've been sleeping in the loft." Winifred touched her brother's arm. "It's wonderful, Sam, truly." And despite her initial misgivings, she meant it. There was something honest and welcoming about the modest home. While Samuel prepared a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and biscuits, Ethan helped bring in Winifred's trunk from the wagon. She noticed how he moved with an easy grace despite his tall frame, how his hands, strong and calloused, handled her belongings with unexpected gentleness. "Your brother tells me you were a teacher in Boston," Ethan said as they sat down to eat. Winifred nodded. "I taught at a girls' school, literature and history, primarily. We've got about 15 children within riding distance who get no schooling at all," Samuel explained. "The settlement's been trying to establish a proper school, but we need a teacher. I've offered the old bunkhouse on my property," Ethan added. "It needs work, but it's centrally located for most families." Winifred felt a spark of excitement at the prospect of continuing her profession here. "I'd be happy to help establish a school. It would give me purpose." "The children would benefit greatly," Ethan said, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "Most of their parents can't read or write much beyond their names." As they ate, Samuel filled Winifred in on the local community. The closest town, Promise Creek, was 20 miles away and consisted of little more than a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of buildings. The nearest doctor was there, as was the sheriff. "We're a scattered community," Samuel explained, "but we look after each other. There's a social at the Wallace place every other Saturday. Dancing, food, gossip, it's how we stay connected." "There's one this Saturday," Ethan said. "Would be a good way for you to meet your neighbors, Miss Mason." The thought of attending a social event so soon after her arrival made Winifred nervous, but she nodded politely. "That sounds lovely." After dinner, Samuel excused himself to tend to the livestock for the night, leaving Winifred and Ethan alone at the table. An awkward silence fell between them. "I should be heading back," Ethan said finally, rising from his chair. "It's a fair ride to my place." "Thank you again for your kindness today," Winifred said, walking with him to the door. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Ethan paused at the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the night sky now filled with more stars than Winifred had ever seen. "Like I said, I guess I was meant to be there." His voice was low, almost intimate in the quiet room. "Welcome to Wyoming, Miss Mason." "Winifred," she corrected softly, "or Winnie if you prefer." A smile touched his lips. "Winnie then." He placed his hat on his head and stepped onto the porch. "I'll be by in a couple of days to show you the bunkhouse if you're serious about teaching." "I am." He nodded once. "Good night then." She watched as he mounted his horse. He'd left the wagon for Samuel to return later and rode away into the darkness. Long after he'd disappeared from sight, Winifred remained on the porch, gazing at the stars and wondering at the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this wild place. Samuel joined her, draping a blanket around her shoulders against the evening chill. "He's a good man, Thornton." "He seems to be," she agreed carefully. "One of the most respected ranchers in these parts, built his place from nothing." Samuel glanced at his sister. "And unmarried, if you're wondering." Winifred felt her cheeks warm. "I wasn't," Samuel chuckled, "Of course not. Come inside before you catch your death. Tomorrow I'll show you around properly." As she followed her brother inside, Winifred couldn't help casting one last glance in the direction Ethan had ridden. Perhaps her train coming early had been more than just an inconvenience after all. The next few days passed in a whirlwind as Winifred acclimated to her new life. She learned the rhythms of the homestead, waking before dawn, gathering eggs from the small henhouse, hauling water from the well, and helping Samuel with the endless chores that kept the place functioning. Her hands, once soft and pale, quickly became chapped and reddened. Her fashionable Boston dresses remained packed away, replaced by the simpler, sturdier clothing she'd brought for frontier life. Despite the physical demands, Winifred found herself enjoying the clean air, the open spaces, and the profound quiet that settled over the land at night. She'd never seen stars so bright or skies so vast, and each sunset painted the world in colors she hadn't known existed. On the third day, true to his word, Ethan arrived to show her the potential schoolhouse. He appeared at midday, riding a magnificent chestnut stallion and leading a gentle-looking mare. "Thought you might like to ride rather than take the wagon," he explained as Samuel helped her mount the mare. "You can see more of the country that way." Winifred hadn't ridden since she was a girl, and never astride as was necessary in these parts. She felt awkward and uncertain, but the mare Sugar, Ethan called her, was patient and responsive. "She's yours to borrow whenever you need," Ethan said as they rode away from the homestead. "A teacher needs reliable transportation." "That's very generous," Winifred replied, touched by his thoughtfulness. They rode for nearly an hour, Ethan pointing out landmarks and explaining the geography of the area. He showed her where the creek widened into a small pond, perfect for swimming in summer. He indicated distant buttes and rock formations, naming each and sharing brief stories about them. Some were practical good shelter during storms, while others were steeped in local lore or Native American history. The Shoshone believe that rock formation there is the sleeping form of a great warrior, he explained, pointing to a distant ridge that did indeed resemble a reclining figure. "They say he watches over the valley and keeps it safe." Winifred found herself fascinated by Ethan's knowledge and respect for the land and its original inhabitants. He wasn't the rough, uncultured cowboy she might have expected. There was a depth to him that intrigued her. Eventually, they crested a small hill, and Ethan's ranch came into view. Unlike Samuel's modest homestead, Ethan's property was substantial, a large main house built of logs, a sturdy barn, corrals filled with horses, and several outbuildings. A creek ran through the property and cottonwood trees provided shade around the house. "It's beautiful," Winifred said sincerely. Pride flickered in Ethan's eyes. "Took 7 years to build it all. Started with just a one-room cabin." He pointed to a small structure near the creek. "That was home for the first 2 years. You've accomplished a great deal. Had to prove the naysayers wrong," he said with a slight smile. "Not many thought a former Union cavalry officer with no ranching experience could make it out here. You fought in the war?" Winifred asked, suddenly understanding the straight-backed way he carried himself, the air of quiet authority. 7th Kansas Cavalry, left as a captain." He said it matter-of-factly, without pride or regret. "War ended, and I couldn't go back to normal life in Missouri. Needed open spaces and a fresh start." They rode down toward the ranch, and Ethan pointed to a long, low building set apart from the others. "That's the old bunkhouse. Used it when I had more hands during roundup, but now I only need a couple of men year-round, and they stay in quarters behind the barn." The bunkhouse was weathered but solid, with several windows and a small porch. Inside was one large room with a stone fireplace at one end. It would need work, Ethan said as they dismounted and entered. New floor, proper desks, blackboard, but the structure is sound. Winifred walked around the space, already envisioning how it could be transformed into a schoolroom. It's perfect, she said. With some work, this could be a wonderful school. I'll talk to the other ranchers and settlers. We can organize a work party to fix it up proper. Ethan watched her as she explored the room. Most folks around here value education, even if they don't have much themselves. They want better for their children. How many families are there? Within riding distance. About 12 with children of various ages. Some as young as 5, others nearly grown at 16 or 17. He leaned against the doorframe. Most can't spare their children every day, especially during planting and harvest. But even 3 days a week would be more schooling than they get now. Winifred nodded, already formulating plans. We would need books, slates, chalk. Next supply wagon comes through in 2 weeks. We can place an order with the merchant in Cheyenne. Ethan smiled at her enthusiasm. So you'll do it, of course. It's why I came west. She ran her hand along the rough wooden wall, though I never imagined teaching in such a setting. Life out here is rarely what people imagine. His voice had softened. It's harder in some ways, easier in others. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Winifred felt as though something unspoken passed between them, some recognition or understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. The moment was broken when Ethan's foreman, a grizzled older man named Jenkins, appeared at the door to report a problem with one of the wells. "Duty calls," Ethan said with a rueful smile. "Would you like to see the rest of the ranch before we head back?" Winifred nodded eagerly, and Ethan gave her a tour of his property. She met his small crew besides Jenkins. There was a young cowhand named Billy, and a Mexican cook called Miguel, who insisted she stay for lunch. The meal was simple but delicious: fresh bread, beef stew, and apple pie that Miguel proudly declared was better than any Boston baker's. As they ate on the porch, Winifred observed the easy camaraderie among Ethan and his men. There was respect there, but also genuine affection. These men were more than employees, they were a kind of family. "Miss Mason here is going to be our school teacher," Ethan told them. "We're fixing up the old bunkhouse." "About time," Jenkins said with approval. "My granddaughter lives over at the Peterson place. Smart as a whip but can barely read." "How old is she?" Winifred asked. "Just turned 12. Name's Lily. Her ma died of fever 2 years back, and her pa, my son, works the Peterson ranch. Ain't much time for book learning." "I'll make sure she gets special attention," Winifred promised. After lunch, Ethan rode with her back toward Samuel's homestead. The afternoon was warm, the prairie vibrant with late summer wildflowers. They rode at a leisurely pace, talking easily about books they'd read, places they'd seen, and their hopes for the school. "The social is tomorrow night," Ethan reminded her as they neared her brother's place. "I'd be honored to escort you and your brother if you're willing." Winifred felt a flutter of anticipation. "That would be lovely, thank you. I'll come by around 5 then." He tipped his hat as they reached the homestead. "Until tomorrow, Winnie." As she watched him ride away, Winifred acknowledged to herself that Ethan Thornton was not at all what she'd expected to find in Wyoming Territory. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was a very good thing indeed. The Wallace homestead was alight with lanterns, and alive with the sounds of fiddle music and laughter when Ethan's wagon arrived with Winifred and Samuel. At least 30 people had gathered in and around the large barn, which had been cleared for dancing. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and children darted about playing games while adults chatted in small groups. Winifred felt suddenly self-conscious in her best dress, a deep blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. It was modest and practical by Boston standards, but felt overdressed compared to the simple calico most women wore. Still, when Ethan helped her down from the wagon, his appreciative glance boosted her confidence. "You look lovely," he said quietly, offering his arm to escort her inside. Samuel had already hurried ahead to greet a pretty young woman with auburn hair who was helping serve food. "My brother seems to have abandoned us," Winifred observed with amusement. "That's Eliza Hughes. Her father has the spread east of here." "Samuel's been sweet on her for months," Ethan explained with a chuckle. "I should warn you, everyone will want to meet you. News travels fast out here, and a new schoolteacher is big news indeed." He was right. Within minutes, Winifred found herself surrounded by curious neighbors. Parents introduced themselves and their children, asking about her plans for the school. Young, unmarried men edged closer, trying to catch her attention, while older women assessed her with knowing eyes. Throughout it all, Ethan remained by her side, introducing her to everyone, and ensuring she wasn't overwhelmed. His presence was reassuring in the sea of unfamiliar faces. Mrs. Wallace, the hostess, was a plump, cheerful woman who pressed a plate of food into Winifred's hands. "You're too thin, dear. Life out here requires more meat on your bones." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "And I see Ethan Thornton hasn't left your side all evening. Half the unmarried women in 3 counties have set their caps for him without success." Winifred felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Thornton has been very kind in helping me establish the school. It's nothing more than that." Mrs. Wallace's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. "If you say so, dear. Now, eat up. Dancing will start soon." The fiddle music changed tempo, and couples began to form lines for a Virginia reel. Ethan turned to Winifred. "May I have this dance, Miss Mason?" Dancing had been one of Winifred's favorite pastimes in Boston, though the formal balls she'd attended there were nothing like this rustic gathering. Still, when Ethan took her hand and led her into the line of dancers, she felt the same flutter of excitement. The dance was lively and less structured than she was accustomed to, but Winifred quickly caught on. Ethan moved with unexpected grace for such a tall man, guiding her through the steps with gentle pressure on her hand or waist. When the dance called for them to circle each other, their eyes locked, and Winifred felt a jolt of connection that left her momentarily breathless. They danced 3 sets before taking a break for refreshments. Punch was served in tin cups, and Ethan led her outside where the night air offered relief from the heat of the crowded barn. Stars blanketed the sky above them, more brilliant than any city dweller could imagine. Winifred tipped her head back to gaze at them, marveling at the beauty. "It still takes my breath away," Ethan said softly, following her gaze. "Even after all these years. I've never seen anything like it," she admitted. "In Boston, the gas lamps and buildings obscure most stars. One of the many things I love about this place. Makes a man feel both insignificant and connected to something greater, all at once." His philosophical observation surprised her. Again, Ethan Thornton defied her expectations. They were interrupted by a group of children who ran up to Winifred, eager to know when school would start. "Mr. Thornton says you know all about books and history," a freckle-faced boy of about 10 said excitedly. "Is it true you've been to Washington, D.C.? Winifred laughed. "Yes, it's true. I visited when I was a girl, not much older than you." "Did you see the president?" asked a shy girl with braided blonde hair. "Not then, no, but I did once see President Grant at a parade in Boston." The children peppered her with questions until their parents called them away, apologizing for the interruption. "You're good with them," Ethan observed. "They'll be lucky to have you as their teacher." "I've always loved teaching," Winifred said. It's not just about reading and sums, it's about opening minds to possibilities. That's a gift, especially out here where horizons can seem limited. He offered her his arm again. Shall we go back in? I believe they're playing a waltz. The waltz was more intimate than the group dances, requiring Ethan to place his hand on her waist while holding her other hand. Winifred was acutely aware of his touch, gentle but firm, as he guided her around the makeshift dance floor. "You dance very well, Mr. Thornton," she said to break the charged silence between them. "My mother insisted all her sons learn properly, said no woman wants a man who steps on her toes." A smile touched his lips, "though I haven't had much opportunity to practice out here. You have brothers?" "Two, both back in Missouri. William runs the family farm and James is a lawyer in St. Louis." There was a hint of something in his voice, perhaps wistfulness. "We write, but I haven't seen them since before the war." "That's a long time," he nodded. "Too long. But life takes us down different paths." The music slowed, and somehow they moved closer together. Winifred could feel the steady rhythm of Ethan's breathing, smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "I'm glad your path crossed mine at that train station," he said quietly, his blue eyes intent on hers. Winifred's heart quickened. "As am I." The music ended, breaking the spell between them. Ethan stepped back, though he maintained his hold on her hand a moment longer than necessary. The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant blur of dancing, conversations, and laughter. Winifred met more neighbors, collected promises from parents to send their children to school, and even agreed to help organize a quilting circle with the local women. Through it all, she was aware of Ethan's presence, the way his eyes followed her across the room, how he always seemed to be nearby when she needed a friendly face. By the time they loaded into his wagon for the ride home, Winifred had to admit to herself that her interest in Ethan Thornton had grown beyond mere gratitude or friendship. Samuel, who had spent most of the evening with Eliza Hughes, was full of good spirits on the ride home, chattering about the community and how well Winifred seemed to fit in already. "Everyone's talking about the school," he told her. "Mrs. Peterson said her boys have never shown interest in learning before, but they're excited about having a real teacher. The bunkhouse at Ethan's place will make a fine schoolhouse," Winifred said. "We just need to prepare it properly." "We'll have a work party next Saturday," Ethan said. "Already spoke to several men tonight who agreed to help. The women are organizing supplies." When they reached the Mason homestead, Samuel tactfully excused himself to check on the animals, leaving Ethan and Winifred alone for a moment. "Thank you for a lovely evening," Winifred said, suddenly shy in the darkness. "The pleasure was all mine." Ethan took her hand, his touch sending a tingle up her arm. "I'll come by Tuesday to take you to see the schoolhouse again. The carpenter wants to measure for desks. I look forward to it." He hesitated as if wanting to say more, then simply squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Good night, Winnie." As Winifred prepared for bed that night, her mind replayed the evening, the dancing, the conversations, the way Ethan had looked at her under the stars. She had come west seeking a new life, never expecting to find herself drawn to a man so quickly. Yet there was something about Ethan Thornton that called to her, something beyond his handsome features or the security he could offer. There was a depth to him, a thoughtfulness that matched her own, and a kindness that showed in his interactions with everyone from children to the elderly. Sleep came slowly as she pondered what lay ahead. The school would give her purpose, but perhaps, just perhaps, there might be room in her new life for something more. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity as Winifred settled into her new life and preparations for the school moved forward. True to his word, Ethan organized a work party to renovate the bunkhouse. More than a dozen men showed up with tools and lumber, and within 2 days, the building was transformed. They laid a proper wooden floor, installed new windows for better light, built sturdy desks and benches, and erected a large blackboard at one end of the room. The women of the community contributed as well, sewing curtains, bringing books from their personal collections, and organizing a community meal to feed the workers. Winifred worked alongside them, getting to know her neighbors and earning their respect with her willingness to pitch in. Through it all, Ethan was a constant presence. He supervised the construction, made sure the stove was in good working order for winter, and even built Winifred a special desk with a drawer that locked, where she could keep important papers and valuables. "It's coming along beautifully," Winifred said to him as they stood in the doorway of the nearly completed schoolhouse, surveying the work. "I never expected such support. Education matters to folks here, even if many didn't get much themselves." Ethan's arm brushed against hers, a casual touch that sent warmth through her. "And they like you. You've made quite an impression." The community had indeed embraced Winifred. She'd been invited to meals at nearly every home within riding distance, taught several women to read better during evening gatherings, and even helped deliver a baby when the doctor couldn't arrive in time. The latter had been a terrifying but exhilarating experience that had earned her the deep gratitude of the young couple and admiration from others. School was set to begin the following Monday, and Winifred had spent days organizing her curriculum, assessing the varied levels of her future students, and preparing lessons that would engage children of different ages simultaneously. "Are you nervous?" Ethan asked as they walked back toward his house, where dinner waited. It had become a routine for Winifred to dine with him whenever she came to work on the schoolhouse, sometimes with Samuel joining them, other times just the two of them. "A little," she admitted. "Teaching here will be very different from my school in Boston. There, the classes were separated by age and ability, and we had ample supplies. Here," she gestured to the single room where children ranging from 5 to 17 would learn together. "You'll manage beautifully," Ethan assured her. "You're resourceful and dedicated. The children are lucky to have you." His confidence in her abilities warmed Winifred's heart. Over these weeks, her feelings for Ethan had deepened. They'd spent hours talking while they worked on the school or rode across his property. He'd shown her his favorite places: a hidden waterfall, a grove of ancient cottonwoods, a high ridge with views that stretched for miles. They'd shared stories of their childhoods, discussed books they'd both read, and debated everything from politics to the future of the West. Ethan was well read for a rancher, with a natural intelligence and curiosity that matched her own. He subscribed to newspapers from as far away as Chicago and New York, kept a small but quality library in his home, and often asked thoughtful questions about her teaching methods and philosophies. For his part, Ethan had been unfailingly kind and respectful, never presuming more than friendship despite the obvious interest in his eyes. He'd introduced her to life on the frontier with patience, teaching her to ride properly, to identify edible plants, to understand the weather patterns that could mean life or death in this harsh land. As they approached his house, the delicious smell of Miguel's cooking wafted out to greet them. The older man had taken a liking to Winifred and always prepared special dishes when she visited. "I believe Miguel has made apple dumplings," Ethan said with a smile. "He knows they're your favorite." "He spoils me," Winifred laughed. "We all want to," Ethan said softly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Before she could respond, Miguel appeared at the door, wiping his hands on his apron. "Dinner is getting cold. Come, come." The moment broken, They entered the warm kitchen where the table was set for two. Miguel served them roast beef, potatoes, fresh vegetables from Ethan's garden, and hot bread before tactfully retreating to his quarters behind the kitchen. "I've been thinking," Ethan said as they ate. "The school is 5 miles from your brother's place. Once winter comes, that's a long, cold ride each day." Winifred nodded. She'd been concerned about the same issue. "Samuel suggested I might stay with families closer to the school during the worst weather. I have another idea." Ethan seemed uncharacteristically nervous. "The old cabin where I first lived is small but sturdy with a good stove. It's just sitting empty, not 100 yards from the schoolhouse. With some fixing up, it could make a comfortable place for you during the week. You could still go home to Samuel's on weekends." Winifred considered the offer. It made practical sense, yet living on Ethan's property, even in a separate cabin, might raise eyebrows. "It's very kind of you to offer," she said carefully. "I know it might seem improper," Ethan acknowledged, reading her concern. "But your reputation is important to me. I thought perhaps Mrs. Jenkins, my foreman's wife, might stay with you. She's been wanting to move back to the main ranch anyway, and this would give her a reason." His thoughtfulness touched Winifred deeply. He had considered not just her practical needs but her reputation and comfort as well. "That would be a perfect solution," she said. "Thank you, Ethan." Relief crossed his face. "Good. We can start fixing it up this week. I want it ready before the first snow." After dinner, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they'd established during her visits. The fiery colors painted the sky and reflected off the distant mountains, creating a spectacle so beautiful it almost hurt to look at it. "I never tire of this view," Ethan said quietly. 7 years and every sunset still feels like a gift," Winifred nodded. "I understand why you love it here. There's a presence to this land, a spirit." "Exactly." He looked at her with surprise and pleasure. "Most Easterners never feel that. They see only emptiness where we see fullness." "I'm learning to see through new eyes," she said softly. Their hands rested side by side on the porch railing, not quite touching. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan moved his hand until his little finger brushed against hers. It was the smallest of contacts, yet Winifred felt it like a current running through her body. Neither spoke as their fingers gradually intertwined, the simple touch more intimate than any words could have been. They watched in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. Finally, reluctantly, Ethan stood. "I should get you back to your brother's before it's fully dark." The ride to Samuel's homestead was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Samuel was sitting on the porch with Eliza Hughes, their heads bent close together in conversation. They sprang apart when the wagon approached, both looking slightly guilty. "Eliza came to help me with some mending," Samuel explained hastily. "At night?" Ethan asked with a raised eyebrow and a knowing smile. Eliza blushed prettily. "I should be going. My father will be wondering where I am." She hurried to her horse tied nearby. "I'll ride with you," Samuel offered immediately. "Make sure you get home safe." As the pair rode off into the darkness, Ethan helped Winifred down from the wagon. "Your brother seems quite smitten." "As does Eliza," Winifred agreed with a smile. "She's lovely." "She is," Ethan agreed, "but not as lovely as her teacher." The compliment, spoken in the velvety darkness with no one to overhear, made Winifred's pulse quicken. Ethan stood very close, his tall form blocking out the stars behind him. "Winnie," he said softly, "may I call on you properly? Not just for school matters or neighborly visits, but as a man calls on a woman he admires greatly." His directness both startled and pleased her. "Yes," she replied simply. "I would like that very much." In the darkness, she could see the flash of his smile. He took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture both old-fashioned and thrilling. "Good night, then," he murmured. "I'll see you tomorrow." As his wagon disappeared into the night, Winifred remained on the porch, her hand still tingling from his kiss. She had come west seeking a new beginning, never imagining that beginning might include Ethan Thornton. Yet here she was, her heart fuller than it had been in years, her future suddenly bright with possibilities she hadn't dared to consider before. The school opened on a crisp Monday morning in early October. Winifred arrived an hour early to prepare, her stomach fluttering with nervous excitement. She arranged her books and papers, checked that there was fresh chalk for the blackboard, and made sure the stove was properly lit to ward off the morning chill. By 8 o'clock, children began arriving on horseback, in wagons, or on foot, depending on how far they lived from the school. Some came alone, others with siblings or cousins. By 8:30, 17 students ranging from 5 to 16 years had gathered in front of the schoolhouse, eyeing their new teacher with a mixture of curiosity, excitement, and in some cases, wariness. Winifred rang the bell Ethan had mounted by the door, signaling the official start of school. The children filed in, the younger ones wide-eyed at the transformed bunkhouse with its neat rows of desks, colorful maps on the walls, and their very own teacher standing at the front in a crisp blue dress. "Good morning," Winifred greeted them warmly. "I'm Miss Mason, and I'm very pleased to be your teacher. Welcome to our school." The first day was devoted to assessments, as Winifred needed to determine each child's level of education. Some of the older boys had never held a pencil before, while a few of the girls had been taught basic reading and writing by their mothers. Lily Jenkins, the foreman's granddaughter, proved exceptionally bright, devouring the primer Winifred gave her and asking for more. By the end of the day, Winifred had organized her students into groups based on ability rather than age. She explained that each group would have specific lessons while others worked independently, and that older students would sometimes help younger ones, a system that would allow her to teach effectively, despite the wide range of needs. As the children filed out at day's end, Ethan arrived on horseback, ostensibly to check that everything had gone well. Winifred couldn't help the smile that bloomed on her face at the sight of him. "How was your first day, Miss Mason?" he asked formally, aware of the curious children watching them. "Wonderful and exhausting in equal measure," she replied honestly. "I have much work to do, but they're eager to learn," he nodded approvingly. "The cabin is coming along well. Should be ready by next week if that suits you." "Thank you. That would be perfect." They maintained this professional demeanor until the last child had departed. Only then did Ethan's expression soften into the warm smile he reserved for her alone. "You look right at home here," he said, gesturing to the schoolroom. "I feel at home," she admitted. "More so than I expected." He helped her tidy the room and extinguish the stove before escorting her back to Samuel's place. True to his word about calling on her properly, he'd begun taking Sunday dinners with them, and occasionally accompanied them to church in Promise Creek when weather permitted the long ride. Samuel, initially protective, had quickly warmed to the idea of his sister being courted by Ethan. The two men got along well, sharing similar values and a deep connection to the land. And Samuel, now openly courting Eliza Hughes, could hardly object to his sister finding happiness of her own. The following week, Winifred moved into the cabin near the schoolhouse. Ethan and his men had transformed the simple structure into a cozy home. They'd added a small bedroom separated by a curtain from the main room, installed shelves for her books, provided a comfortable rocking chair by the stove, and even decorated the windows with the blue and white curtains. Mrs. Jenkins had sewn especially for her. Mrs. Jenkins herself, a motherly woman in her 50s, moved into the second bedroom. Her presence ensured propriety, though she tactfully made herself scarce when Ethan visited in the evenings. Life fell into a pleasant rhythm. Weekdays were devoted to teaching, with Winifred rising early to prepare lessons and staying late to help students who needed extra attention. Ethan often rode by at the end of the day, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book he thought she'd enjoy, wildflowers he'd gathered, or treats from Miguel's kitchen. On Saturdays, they would ride together exploring the countryside, or Ethan would teach her practical skills like tracking animals or predicting weather from cloud patterns. Sundays were spent at church when possible, followed by dinner with Samuel or at the Jenkins home. As October gave way to November, the weather turned colder. The first snow fell, transforming the landscape into a glistening wonderland that took Winifred's breath away. School attendance became more erratic as bad weather or farm chores kept children home, but those who came were even more dedicated to learning. One evening in mid-November, Ethan arrived at the cabin with his saddle bags full. "I brought something special," he announced as Mrs. Jenkins discreetly retired to her room with a knowing smile. Miguel made a feast. He unpacked containers of stew still warm in their wrappings, freshly baked bread, a jar of preserved peaches, and even a small cake. "What's the occasion?" Winifred asked, delighted by the surprise. "2 months ago today, your train came early and no one was there to meet you," Ethan said, his eyes warm in the lamplight. "Except me." Winifred's heart swelled at the realization he'd remembered the exact date of their meeting. "You've been counting the days. Every one." He reached across the table they'd set for dinner and took her hand. "The best days of my life, Winnie." They ate by lamplight, talking easily about their day. Ethan described a new colt born on his ranch, while Winifred shared a breakthrough with one of her struggling students. Their conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by comfortable silences and shared smiles. After dinner, they sat by the stove, the warmth of the fire matching the warmth between them. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting past the window. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, his deep voice thoughtful, "about fate and timing." "Have you?" Winifred's pulse quickened at his serious tone. "If your train hadn't come early that day, or if I hadn't been passing through at that exact moment." He shook his head, marveling at the coincidence. "Our paths might never have crossed. I'd like to think they would have eventually," Winifred said. "In a community this small, perhaps, but it might not have been the same." He took her hand again, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I wouldn't have been the first person you met, the one to show you your new home. I might just have been another rancher at a social, one among many." "You could never be just one among many, Ethan," she said softly. His eyes darkened at her words. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers, a question more than a kiss. Winifred answered by closing the distance between them, returning the kiss with a gentle pressure that conveyed her own feelings more eloquently than words could have done. When they parted, Ethan's expression was one of wonder and happiness. "I've been wanting to do that since I first saw you standing alone on that platform, looking so lost and so brave all at once. I'm glad you waited until I wasn't lost anymore," she said with a smile. He chuckled softly, then grew serious again. "Winnie, I need you to know my intentions are honorable. I care for you deeply, more than I've ever cared for anyone, but I want to do this right." "And what is right in your estimation, Mr. Thornton?" she asked, a teasing note in her voice despite the seriousness of the moment. "Courting you properly, getting to know each other through all seasons, and when the time is right." He hesitated, then forged ahead. "When the time is right, asking you to be my wife, if you could see yourself building a life here with me." The declaration, though not unexpected given the growing closeness between them, still made Winifred's heart race. She had come west seeking independence and purpose, not necessarily marriage. Yet the thought of building a life with Ethan, of sharing his home and his dreams, filled her with joy rather than trepidation. "I think I could see that," she said softly. Very clearly, in fact. The smile that illuminated his face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. He gathered her hands in his and kissed them reverently. "That's all I ask for now, the chance to show you what our life could be." They sat together by the fire until the snow stopped falling, talking of small things and large, their hopes for the school, plans for his ranch, books they loved, and dreams they shared. When Ethan finally rose to leave, reluctance evident in every movement, he kissed her once more at the door, a kiss of promise and possibility. As Winifred watched him ride away through the moonlit snow, she felt as though her heart had found its home, just as surely as she had found hers in this wild, beautiful land. Her train had indeed come early, but perhaps it had arrived at exactly the right time after all. Winter settled over the Wyoming Territory with a fierce intensity that tested even the hardiest settlers. Blizzards swept across the prairie, piling snowdrifts higher than a man's head and forcing everyone to remain close to home for days at a time. School was frequently canceled when travel became too dangerous, and Winifred spent those days in her cabin, preparing lessons, grading the simple assignments her students completed, and reading the books Ethan had lent her. Despite the harsh conditions, these were among the happiest months of Winifred's life. The small community drew closer together, sharing resources and checking on one another after storms. Families who lived near enough to the school took turns hosting the children who could make it for lessons, creating impromptu classrooms in their homes when the roads to the schoolhouse were impassable. Ethan was a constant presence, making sure Winifred and Mrs. Jenkins had ample firewood and supplies. He would appear on horseback after each storm, sometimes having broken trail for miles through deep snow just to ensure they were safe. On the worst days, when even he couldn't reach them, he would fire 3 shots into the air from his property, and Winifred would answer with a single shot from the rifle he'd insisted on teaching her to use, their way of communicating across the snow-covered distance. Christmas approached, bringing with it preparations for the community celebration to be held at Ethan's ranch, which had the largest house in the area. The women gathered at Winifred's cabin to make decorations from paper, pine cones, and ribbons, while the men hunted for a suitable tree and prepared the feast. On Christmas Eve, Samuel arrived at the cabin to escort Winifred and Mrs. Jenkins to the celebration. His cheeks were red from the cold, but his eyes sparkled with excitement. "I have news," he announced as soon as they were settled in the wagon, well wrapped in blankets against the bitter cold. "I've asked Eliza to marry me, and she's accepted." Winifred embraced her brother joyfully. "Oh, Sam, I'm so happy for you both. We're planning a spring wedding once the worst of winter passes. Her father has given us a parcel of his land as a wedding gift adjoining mine. We'll build our home there." "That's wonderful news. Eliza is perfect for you." Samuel grinned sheepishly. "I was hoping for your approval. You'll stand with us at the ceremony." "I would be honored." As they approached Ethan's ranch, Winifred could see the warm glow of lanterns and candles through the windows. The main house was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and smoke curled invitingly from the chimney. Ethan himself met them at the door, handsome in a clean white shirt and dark vest. His eyes found Winifred immediately, warming with pleasure at the sight of her in her best dress, a deep green wool that complemented her auburn hair. "Merry Christmas," he said softly, helping her down from the wagon. "You look beautiful." Inside, the house was transformed. A tall pine tree stood in the corner of the main room, decorated with paper stars, strings of berries, and small carved wooden ornaments the children had made in school. Candles glowed in every window, and the delicious scents of roasting meat, pies, and spiced cider filled the air. Nearly 40 people had gathered, every family within traveling distance, plus a few cowboys from neighboring ranches who had nowhere else to go for the holiday. Children darted about excitedly, the older ones keeping watch over the younger in a natural extension of the school hierarchy Winifred had established. Ethan's foreman, Jenkins, played the fiddle while Miguel led a small group of musicians with his guitar. People danced, sang carols, ate the feast laid out on long tables, and exchanged simple gifts, mostly handmade items or practical necessities. Winifred had spent weeks secretly knitting Ethan a scarf, using blue yarn that matched his eyes. When she presented it to him, his face lit with pleasure. "It's perfect," he said, immediately wrapping it around his neck, "and matches what I have for you." He led her to a quiet corner and handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Inside was a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a book, with tiny hinges that allowed it to open. Nestled inside were 2 miniature portraits, one of Ethan and one of Winifred herself. "How did you?" she gasped, touching the tiny paintings with wonder. "There's an artist in Cheyenne who does them. I sent him a sketch of you that Lily Jenkins drew. The girl has quite a talent, and one of myself." He looked suddenly uncertain. "Do you like it? I thought you could wear it when we're apart as a reminder." "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received," Winifred said truthfully, blinking back tears of happiness. "Will you pin it on for me?" His fingers were surprisingly deft as he fastened the brooch to her dress, just above her heart. The warmth of his touch lingered even after he stepped back. The evening progressed with more music, stories, and laughter. Samuel announced his engagement to Eliza, prompting cheers and congratulations from the assembled guests. Midnight approached, and with it the traditional reading of the Christmas story from the Bible. As the oldest member of the community, Mrs. Peterson had the honor of reading. Her voice, though wavering with age, carried clearly through the hushed room as she recounted the Nativity. Children sat cross-legged on the floor, their faces upturned and attentive, while adults stood with heads bowed in reverence. When the reading concluded, someone began to sing Silent Night, and others joined in, their voices blending in the warm, candlelit room. Ethan stood beside Winifred, his arm brushing against hers, and when he took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Later, as guests began to depart, Ethan drew Winifred onto the porch for a moment of privacy. The night was clear and bitterly cold, stars blazing overhead in a black velvet sky. Their breath formed white clouds in the frigid air. "I have one more gift for you," he said, producing a small leather-bound book from his pocket. "It's not much, but—" Winifred opened it to find blank pages, the paper of high quality with a pencil tucked into the binding. "For your thoughts," Ethan explained. "You mentioned once that you used to keep a journal in Boston but hadn't continued here. I thought perhaps you might want to record this new chapter of your life." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. "Thank you, Ethan. I shall treasure it." He stepped closer, his tall frame blocking the wind. "Winnie," he said softly, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. I know we agreed to take time to court properly, but I find myself growing more certain with each passing day." "As do I," she admitted, her heart racing at the intensity in his blue eyes. "Then might I hope that by next Christmas we might be celebrating together as more than neighbors, as more than friends?" The question, though not a formal proposal, carried the weight of one. Winifred knew what he was asking, whether she could see herself as his wife, the mistress of his home, a permanent part of this wild, beautiful land that had so unexpectedly captured her heart. "I would like that very much," she said softly. His smile was like sunshine breaking through winter clouds. He cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her a kiss of promise, of future, of home. Winifred returned it with all the love that had grown in her heart since that first fateful meeting at the train station. When they parted, Ethan rested his forehead against hers for a moment. "Merry Christmas, Winnie." "Merry Christmas, Ethan." As they returned to the warmth and light of the house, Winifred's heart was fuller than she had ever thought possible. Whatever the future might hold, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged in this community, in this land, and by Ethan Thornton's side. Winter eventually loosened its grip on the land, reluctantly yielding to spring's persistent advance. Snow melted, revealing muddy ground that gradually firmed and greened. Creeks swollen with snowmelt rushed between their banks, and the first wildflowers appeared in sheltered places, tiny splashes of color against the awakening earth. The school resumed regular sessions as travel became easier. Winifred's students returned with renewed enthusiasm, having missed the structure and companionship during the long, isolated winter. She noted with satisfaction their progress, children who had barely recognized letters in October now reading simple sentences. Older students tackling more complex material with growing confidence. Samuel and Eliza's wedding was set for the first Saturday in May, when the risk of late spring snowstorms had passed. The entire community pitched in to prepare, turning the event into a celebration not just of the couple's union, but of their collective survival of another harsh winter. The ceremony itself was simple but beautiful, held outdoors beside the creek that ran through the Hughes property. Eliza wore a dress of pale blue that her mother and sisters had spent months sewing, with wildflowers woven into her auburn hair. Samuel, usually so practical and undemonstrative, had tears in his eyes as he watched his bride approach on her father's arm. Winifred stood proudly beside her brother, her heart full as she watched him pledge his life to the woman he loved. Across from her, Ethan stood as Samuel's best man, handsome in a new dark suit ordered specially from Cheyenne. Throughout the ceremony, his eyes frequently found hers, the warmth in his gaze making her pulse quicken. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with tables set up outdoors, lanterns hanging from trees, and more food than the small community had seen in one place since Christmas. Dancing continued until the early hours, with even the most elderly residents taking a turn around the makeshift dance floor. As evening deepened, Ethan led Winifred away from the festivities, following a path that wound alongside the creek. The spring night was mild, the air fragrant with new growth and the distant scent of wood smoke from the celebration. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a small footbridge spanning the creek. Ethan stopped in the middle, leaning against the railing and gazing down at the water rushing below, silver in the moonlight. "Your brother looks happy," he observed. "Happier than I've ever seen him." "Love suits him," Winifred agreed, "as does Eliza. Marriage is a partnership out here, more than anywhere else I've known. A man and woman working together, building something that can last, facing hardships side by side." Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "It takes the right kind of woman, strong but gentle too. Intelligent, resilient, Winifred's heart began to race as she recognized the intent behind his words. "And the right kind of man," she added softly. "Honorable, hardworking, kind." Ethan took her hands in his. "Winnie, I promise to court you properly, to give us both time to be certain. These past months have only confirmed what I think I knew that very first day at the train station." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Though she had anticipated this moment, the reality of it, standing on a moonlit bridge with the man she had come to love deeply, still made Winifred's breath catch. "I love you too, Ethan, more than I ever thought possible." His smile was brilliant even in the darkness. Keeping hold of her hand, he knelt on the rough wooden planks of the bridge. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "Winifred Mason, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a ring, not an elaborate diamond as might have been fashionable in Boston, but a simple gold band set with a small sapphire that captured the moonlight. "Yes," she said without hesitation, her voice steady despite the tears of happiness that threatened. "Yes, Ethan, I will marry you." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms. The kiss they shared was one of promise and passion, sealing their commitment to each other under the vast Wyoming sky. When they finally returned to the celebration, hand in hand, their joy was evident to all. Announcements of engagements were traditional at wedding celebrations in the territory, and when Ethan proudly informed the gathering that Winifred had agreed to be his wife, cheers erupted from all sides. Samuel was the first to congratulate them, embracing his sister tightly. "I couldn't wish for a better brother-in-law," he told Ethan sincerely, clapping him on the shoulder. The women gathered around Winifred, admiring her ring and immediately beginning to plan the wedding. Mrs. Wallace, ever practical, suggested combining the ceremony with the summer social in July, when travel would be easiest and the community would already be gathered. "That's barely 2 months away," Winifred said, slightly overwhelmed by the rapid planning. Mrs. Jenkins smiled knowingly. "Out here, we don't believe in long engagements, dear. Winter's coming before you know it, and it's best to be settled before the snow flies." Ethan, overhearing, slipped his arm around Winifred's waist. "Whatever timing Winnie wants is fine by me," he said firmly. "There's no rush." But as the evening progressed, and Winifred considered the practicalities, a summer wedding made sense. She had no family to travel from the east, no elaborate preparations to make. And the thought of beginning married life with Ethan in the gentle summer months, with time to adjust before the challenges of winter, was appealing. "July would be perfect," she told him as they danced under the stars, his arms strong and sure around her. "Are you certain?" "I meant what I said. I don't want to rush you." She nodded, looking up into his beloved face. "I'm certain. About you, about us, about the life we'll build together." His kiss, brief but tender given their public setting, conveyed all the love and promise that words could not express. As they continued to dance, Winifred marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a lonely spinster teacher in Boston to a woman deeply in love, preparing to marry a man who embodied everything she had ever wanted but never dared to hope for. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of activity. By day, Winifred continued teaching, determined to give her students a strong foundation before the summer break. In the evenings and on weekends, she divided her time between preparations for the wedding and helping Samuel and Eliza settle into their new life together. Ethan, meanwhile, was busy making improvements to his home. Though spacious by frontier standards, he wanted everything to be perfect for his bride. He added a proper bathtub in a small room off the kitchen, built new bookshelves in the parlor to accommodate Winifred's collection, and even ordered wallpaper from Cheyenne for the bedroom they would share. Their engagement was a time of deepening connection. They spoke openly about their hopes for the future children they might have, improvements to the ranch, the growth of the school, and their roles in the developing community. They discussed practical matters too, how Winifred might continue teaching after marriage, the running of a household larger than she was accustomed to, and the financial aspects of merging their lives. Through it all, their love and respect for each other only grew stronger. Ethan valued Winifred's intelligence and independence, never suggesting she abandon her teaching or subjugate her own interests to his. Winifred, in turn, appreciated his willingness to consider her perspective and include her in decisions about their future. As July approached, the weather turned hot and dry. The prairie grasses grew tall, then golden in the relentless sun. Wildflowers bloomed in profusion, and Winifred collected and pressed the most beautiful specimens, creating a record of her first full spring in Wyoming. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, with a gentle breeze that rustled the cottonwood leaves and kept the worst of the heat at bay. The ceremony was to be held on Ethan's property, under the ancient trees near the creek, where he had first shown Winifred the hidden waterfall. The women of the community had transformed the area into a natural cathedral. Wildflowers in bloom were gathered in mason jars and hung from tree branches. A simple arch woven with vines and roses from Mrs. Wallace's garden marked the spot where the couple would exchange vows. Benches and chairs borrowed from every home in the area were arranged in rows facing the creek, which provided a musical backdrop with its gentle gurgling. Winifred prepared in the cabin that had been her home these past months. Mrs. Jenkins and several other women helped her dress in the gown. They had collaboratively created a confection of ivory silk ordered from Chicago, embellished with lace from Mrs. Peterson's wedding dress and tiny pearls from Eliza's mother's necklace. Her hair was arranged simply but elegantly, crowned with a wreath of wildflowers. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Jenkins said, tears in her eyes as she adjusted the final details. Ethan won't know what hit him. A knock at the door announced Samuel's arrival to escort his sister to her wedding. His eyes widened at the sight of her. "Winnie," he breathed, "you're a vision." She smiled, suddenly nervous but eager to begin this new chapter of her life. "Is everyone ready? Is Ethan there?" "Everything's perfect, and yes, your groom is waiting." "Looks like he might jump out of his skin with anticipation. Truth be told." Samuel offered his arm. "Shall we?" The walk from the cabin to the ceremony site was brief but meaningful, allowing Winifred a moment to absorb the significance of the day. As they approached, she could hear the soft strains of Music Jenkins on his fiddle, playing a gentle melody that carried on the summer air. When they reached the gathering, the assembled guests rose. Winifred's students were there in their Sunday best, alongside ranch hands, neighboring settlers, and friends who had become like family over the past year. But Winifred saw only Ethan, standing tall and handsome beneath the arch, his eyes fixed on her with an expression of such love and wonder that it brought tears to her eyes. The ceremony was simple but profound. The circuit riding minister, who had arrived the previous day, spoke of love's endurance, of partnership in good times and bad, of building a life rooted in faith and commitment. Ethan and Winifred exchanged the vows they had written together, promising to cherish and support each other through all the seasons of their life together. When Ethan slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady, his eyes never leaving hers. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, His kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would share. The celebration that followed was joyous and uninhibited. Tables laden with food prepared by every household in the community lined one side of the clearing. A space was cleared for dancing, with several musicians taking turns providing music. Children played games in the long summer twilight, while the adults ate, drank, danced, and celebrated the union of two people who had become central to their community. As dusk settled over the land, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Ethan led Winifred in their first dance as husband and wife, holding her close as they moved to a waltz Jenkins played especially for them. "Are you happy, Mrs. Thornton?" Ethan murmured, his lips close to her ear. The new name sent a thrill through Winifred. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "And you, Mr. Thornton, more than I ever thought possible." His blue eyes reflected the lantern light as he gazed down at her. "When your train came early that day and no one was there to meet you." "You were there," she finished for him, her heart full of love for this man who had become her world. "I was meant to be," he said simply, echoing the words he'd spoken at their first meeting. "And I'll be here for all the days to come, Winnie. That's my promise to you." As night fell fully over the Wyoming prairie, the stars emerged one by one, blanketing the sky with their brilliance. The celebration continued around them, but for Ethan and Winifred, there was only each other and the future they would build together in this wild, beautiful land they both loved. Later that night, when the last guests had departed and they were finally alone in the home that was now theirs together, Ethan took Winifred's hand and led her onto the porch. The summer night was warm and fragrant with the scent of prairie grass and distant rain. "Look," he said, pointing to the horizon where heat lightning flickered silently, illuminating distant clouds. Nature's own celebration. Winifred leaned against her husband, content in a way she had never known before. "It's beautiful, all of it." "Welcome home, Winnie," Ethan said softly, his arm strong around her waist. "For as long as we both shall live." And as they stood together beneath the vast Wyoming sky, Winifred knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. Epilogue: 5 years later, the schoolhouse bustled with activity as Winifred arranged desks for the new term beginning tomorrow. Through the open windows, she could hear children's laughter from the playground. Ethan had built last summer a simple structure with swings and a slide that had become a gathering place for families on Sunday afternoons. So much had changed in 5 years, yet the essence of what made this place special remained the same. The school had grown, now boasting over 30 students and a second teacher, Lily Jenkins, once Winifred's brightest pupil, now a capable young woman of 17 who taught the youngest children while pursuing her own advanced studies with Winifred. The community had grown too. A proper town had sprung up around the crossroads near Ethan's ranch, with a permanent church, a doctor's office, a larger general store, and even a small newspaper that Samuel now published alongside his farming duties. More families had settled in the area, drawn by reports of fertile land and a strong community. Winifred smiled as she heard the approach of a wagon. Stepping onto the porch, she shaded her eyes against the late August sun to see Ethan driving toward the school, their 3-year-old son Thomas perched beside him, and their infant daughter Eleanor nestled in a basket at their feet. Her heart swelled with love at the sight of them, Ethan as handsome as the day they'd met, perhaps more so with the contentment that fatherhood had brought him, and their children, both with their father's blue eyes and her auburn hair. "Mama," Thomas called excitedly, waving with his whole arm. "We brought lunch," Ethan corrected gently, stopping the wagon and lifting the boy down. Your mother's been working hard. Thought she might need sustenance." Winifred gathered Thomas into her arms, kissing his sun-warmed cheeks. "What a wonderful surprise." "And how's my Alina today?" she asked as Ethan carefully handed her the basket containing their sleeping daughter, born just 2 months ago. "Perfect, as always," Ethan said, leaning in to kiss his wife. "Though she'll be hungry soon." They spread a blanket under the large cottonwood tree beside the schoolhouse and enjoyed the simple meal Miguel had packed for them: cold chicken, bread, cheese, and early apples from their own orchard, now beginning to produce fruit after years of careful tending. As they ate, Ethan updated Winifred on ranch business while Thomas played with the wooden horse his father had carved for him. Alina woke, and Winifred nursed her discreetly, marveling as she always did at the perfect tiny features of their daughter. "I saw Samuel in town this morning," Ethan said. "Eliza's time is near. The doctor thinks within the week." Winifred nodded. This would be Samuel and Eliza's 3rd child, joining their 2-year-old twins, James and William. "I'll ride over tomorrow after school to see if she needs anything." "Already taken care of. Mrs. Jenkins is there now, and Miguel sent food enough for a week." Ethan smiled at his wife's surprised expression. "I know how you worry about your brother's family. Thought I'd ease your mind." "What would I do without you?" she said fondly. "Fortunately, you'll never have to find out." His hand found hers on the blanket, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of long love. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Thomas chase butterflies in the tall grass. The scene was so perfect, so complete, that Winifred felt tears prick her eyes. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked immediately, attuned as always to her emotions. "Nothing at all," she assured him, blinking away the tears. "I was just thinking about that day at the train station. How lost I felt, how uncertain about the future. And then you appeared." Ethan's expression softened with memory. "You looked so proper in your Boston clothes, clutching that travel bag like it was all you had in the world." "It practically was," she laughed. "And I thought you were terribly forward when you offered me a ride." "I was smitten from the first moment," he admitted. "Told myself it was just being neighborly, but I think I already knew." "Knew what?" "That you were the one I'd been waiting for without even realizing I was waiting." He squeezed her hand. "Remember what I said that day?" Winifred smiled, the words as clear in her memory as if they'd been spoken yesterday. "You said your being there when my train came early was meant to be." "Smartest thing I ever said," Ethan declared, leaning over to kiss her tenderly. And truer words were never spoken. As the afternoon sun gilded the prairie grasses and cast long shadows across the schoolyard, the Thornton family gathered their picnic things and prepared to head home. Thomas, tired from his adventures, curled up beside Alina in the wagon, both children soon lulled to sleep by the rhythmic motion. Ethan helped Winifred onto the seat beside him, his hand lingering on hers. "Happy?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally, as if amazed by his good fortune. Winifred looked around at the life they had built together: the thriving school, the prosperous ranch, their beautiful children, and the community that had embraced her so completely. Most of all, she looked at her husband, whose love had been the foundation upon which everything else was built. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "And you, more than any man deserves to be," he said, his voice husky with emotion. As the wagon rolled toward home, Winifred thought about the journey that had brought her here from a lonely teacher in Boston to a beloved wife, mother, and cornerstone of a growing frontier community. Her train had come early that fateful day, and no one had been there to meet her except a tall cowboy who'd claimed it was meant to be, and he had been right. It was meant to be, all of it. Every joy, every challenge, Every moment of their life together had unfolded exactly as it should, bringing them to this perfect present and the promise of an even brighter future. The sun was setting as they reached their home, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold. Ethan lifted their sleeping children carefully from the wagon while Winifred went ahead to open the door. As she stepped onto the porch of the home they shared, she paused for a moment, overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she had found in this wild, beautiful place. Ethan joined her, their children nestled against his broad shoulders. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Winifred replied, "with exactly who I'm supposed to be with." And as they entered their home together, the first stars of evening appearing in the vast Wyoming sky above them, Winifred knew with absolute certainty that some trains are meant to come early, and some meetings are simply meant to be.